So next up, I'd like to introduce Kathleen Sheehan, securing funding from the government entities for ALS research. I'm sensing a theme here, Kathleen. And we are, again, going to be excitedly taking notes so we can take this back to our own countries, and maybe we can collectively make this pool so much bigger.
Absolutely, and I'm going to give you a tidbit at the end of the presentation, which I think all of you will be able to appreciate and will help you to secure funding. Let me get my hands on this. Okay, so I'm Kathleen Sheehan, Vice President of Public Policy at the ALS Association. Appropriations is one small part of the work that we do. We also do advocacy for drug approval. We're currently advocating for coverage of new ALS drugs. We also work on access to durable medical equipment, medical care, and of all kinds. But of course, getting the money for research is critically important to all of us. I'm going to talk with you. Many of you are advocates, and you have already had experience in this area, but I'm going to share with you how we were able to successfully increase appropriations for the Department of Defense ALS research program. And that is a program that is specifically earmarked for ALS. NIH has a lot of money that they spend on ALS, but that money is part of a larger pool, and every year decisions are made on how much money will go to ALS. The Department of Defense has a very specific pot of money for ALS, and they have a very unique way of distributing it. I chose the Department of Defense because everyone has people who have served in the military in their country, and that is a good way to reach out to policymakers. When I went last night on the carrier, I thought a lot about the men who were on that ship. What were their lives like? What were they dealing with? And what did they deal with when they went home? Did any of them have ALS, and what did they face? And we have people in the military who are serving right now who are also coming home with ALS. We don't know why. We know that incidence for ALS in the military is significantly higher than those in civilians. And so that is a really good way to reach out to policymakers. The work that the Department of Defense does benefits everybody, but it's a great way to sit down with policymakers who care a great deal about the military and say to them, this is where we're going to start in terms of being able to bring ALS research to move it forward. I think that COLDIP yesterday, they said more, better, and faster. And we may adopt that for advocacy in terms of the work that we do. The first thing that you want to do, obviously, is talk about the importance of ALS research, and that's hard to do with policymakers. You honestly have to have a research translator to help them understand what it means, because policymakers generally have a very vague understanding of research. And so when we began this process, we actually involved Dr. Neil Thacker in our conversations with the Department of Defense. We talked with the Department of Defense staff and said, what are you doing? How is it working? What are your needs? And how can we help you make the case? And Neil and now Paul and COLDIP are working with us in the same way to take the very detailed research that is being done by DOD and saying, where are the gaps? The next part is to show where the need is. So when we had our conversation with the Department of Defense, they said, well, we're only funding about 10% of the grants that we're receiving. And I think that was really shocking for us, and it's a great talking point to take to members of Congress to say the need and the desire for this kind of research is so great, but the Department of Defense is having to turn away really excellent proposals, and that is why more funding is needed. We want to identify the champions, and there was a lot of discussion about that earlier in these presentations. So who are your champions? Well, your champions can be policymakers. In the United States, we have an ALS caucus in the House and the Senate, and those members are often very engaged in the work that we do, leading the charge. They care deeply about ALS, and they're willing to reach out to their colleagues. We also have a lot of advocates living with ALS who are very engaged, and they're our champions bringing the message to the Hill. I have to tell you, when we have our June advocacy conference, there is nothing that is more thrilling, more heartwarming, and more intense than having people living with ALS going to visit their members of Congress. Like we had last night, we have vehicles to take people to the Hill in their wheelchairs. They come with ventilators. They come with speech-generating devices. When members of Congress get to meet people living with ALS, it really opens their eyes. And it's actually amazing when you go to speak to congressional staffers. They'll say, oh, yeah, I remember last year that you came and visited with us. And they actually remember the people that they spoke with and have connections to. So you want to identify your champions. In terms of advocates, there's a lot of people out in the field who are also advocates who may not be able to come to Washington, D.C. We've worked to mobilize those advocates in a number of different ways. We have an excellent Contact Congress system where we're able to send out letters to members of Congress. And so we send a letter to the advocate and we say, here's the issue. We've developed the talking points for you. All you have to do is hit a couple of buttons and you can send a letter. We've also done a lot of work to work with advocates to meet in the state and the home district with their members of Congress. So we want to engage everyone. The virtual world has actually made that more possible in some ways because we've been able to engage people who are not able to come to DC in congressional meetings and to really have their voice heard. We do direct lobbying of Congress. All the things that I've mentioned are very important, but in terms of getting legislation introduced and passed and working on the wording, it really helps to have someone who knows the system, who goes on into Capitol Hill and says, this is a specific language that we're looking for, this is why it's necessary, and this is what we want you to do. So move the next one. And then, of course, when we do our visits, whether they're in Washington, D.C., or whether they're back in the state, we generally make our asks first. And then the most important presentation of the meeting is really people living with ALS telling their individual stories. These stories are so compelling, and they really give people living with ALS also, I think, a sense of empowerment and really making a big difference. And that really inspires all of us to work even harder. Follow-through is incredibly important. So after we have these visits and we have these meetings, we go and we talk about, okay, now you've heard from people, what are you going to do? What action are you going to take? So we're constantly in contact with them, following up. Saying thank you, of course, is critically important to members of Congress. There's a lot of competing priorities. And the staffers and the members themselves want to know that they are appreciated, and that's an important part of what we do. And then the next step, of course, is to do it all over again. And because our annual appropriations take place every single year, this is a campaign that we must do every year. ALS in the military, I think you already know that there are more people in the military are more likely to develop ALS. We're very lucky as a result of our advocacy. We were able to get ALS declared to be a presumptive service connection. And so therefore, if you have ALS, the Department of Defense says, okay, this is part of your service, and we're going to give you, they actually declare an immediate disability rating of 100%. So people living with ALS who have been served in the military, once they're able to document that they have ALS, they have instant services and connections. And interesting enough, part of the reason this happened is because the National Academy of Sciences did a report in 2008. And they looked at all the research, and they said, we see a connection between ALS and the military. And that National Academy of Sciences report was instrumental in helping to make all of these policy changes. The Department of Defense program was established by Congress. There are some expert review panels. In terms of research, they do early research pipeline research. And their goal is to speed the progression of new ALS therapies from lab bench to clinical labs. Here's a chart that shows our funding in terms of what we've accomplished. So you can see a dramatic increase. When the program started out, it had very little funding, and then it kind of inched up. And then in the year FY18, we began our effort, and you can see the result in terms of increasing funding. We doubled the funding one year, and then we doubled it the next year, and our goal is to continue doubling it until we get to a level where we've talked to folks at the Department of Defense. They say it would help us if we had at least $130 million every year to be able to do this work. Some of the research funding, of course, goes into current programs, and so you need new funding to be able to fund new initiatives. I think I've told you that our appropriations we work on every single year. Can someone give me a little sip of water? See my glass right there. I'm sorry, I'm having a dry mouth. The new awards support the use of data samples. Sorry, thank you. Data and samples from ALS patients to foster biomarker development, to optimize existing protocols for ALS, and to enrich ongoing clinical therapeutic development. One thing that's really unique about the Department of Defense program is they have two panels that help to guide their work. One of the panels is a programmatic panel, and that programmatic panel is full of people who are researchers, representatives of ALS associations, and all the different federal agencies that work together. Kuldip Dave is on that committee, and he's able to, from his perspective, talk about the work that we're doing and to help the Department of Defense see how what they can do fits into the puzzle that we saw last night. How do all the parts fit together? Equally important is they have a peer review panel, and that is a group of people living with ALS who have volunteered their time and who come in and review proposals. Matt Bellina is one person who's on that panel, and I've given you a little bit of information about him. He was a naval aviator, and he was diagnosed with ALS when he was only 30. He's been very active. And this is really unique. I'm not really aware of any other federal program where they have a peer review panel of people living with ALS, and I think it's critically important to the work that's done in terms of giving that reality test. Researchers are sometimes accused of living in their ivory towers, and people living with ALS are able to say to them, this is how I feel, this is what I need, and this is what you need to be paying attention to. So that makes a tremendous difference. As I mentioned, it's the only federal research earmarked for ALS. And that in 2012, we made the case that 95% of research proposals were not being funded. Numbers make a big difference to policymakers. You can go in and tell stories, and that's critically important, but you have to follow the stories with the numbers, the data, and show them what makes a difference. In that time, there's 80 projects that have been funded through FY19 over the very long period of funding of this program. And of these four promising new ALS drug development candidates have moved into advanced drug development, and 3 have advanced to early phase clinical trials. I would say this, that one of the cases that we made when we went to the Department of Defense and to Congress was to say, the Department of Defense is doing very interesting work, but they have no resources to support clinical trials. And that's an area where you need to be doing more and providing additional funding. What does the Department of Defense do? Animal and cell models. Measure drug target engagement and clinical development. You can talk to Kuldip and Neil about those different topics. What I think is most interesting is the mechanisms that they're using to make the grant awards. So, Therapeutic Idea Award. ideas in the early stage of development. And that's one of the key things the Department of Defense does, is they take an idea that people have and they help to move it forward. So there's greater opportunity for a very wide range of solutions. Therapeutic Development Award. So once you've presented your idea and you're ready to present a candidate for a drugs for clinical trial, the Department of Defense can help you get ready for that. I think someone was talking yesterday about the importance of getting a good application, understanding all the different wheels and stages that are involved in just getting a drug ready for clinical trials, and that's how Department of Defense can help out. And then new, as a result of our increased funding, is the investigational new drug application enabling studies, again, helping people who have an idea about drug development to move forward in the process. As I mentioned, this is our favorite day, lobbying Congress. We actually have 2 lobby opportunities. One is in March and one is in June. And the June is when we bring people living with ALS to Washington, D.C. I'm going to skip through a couple of slides because I see I'm getting close to my time. This is an example of our Dear Colleague letter we sent to Congress, and we ask our advocates to be engaged. This is all, of course, on the website. Here's the contact at the Department of Defense. Christy actually told me in our most recent conversation they are accepting applications for international opportunities. So you have the information to contact her. And before we get to questions, I want to say one last thing, which is the tidbit that I want to offer is that we were very successful, and this is an idea that I really want to credit Kathleen with. When I first came to the association, Kathleen was my boss, and she said, well, what about a National Academy of Sciences study that can be done on ALS? And we said, wow, that's a great idea. So we started running with a ball. It took us 5 or 6 years to get it going, but I'm pleased to announce that we won $1 million for a National Academy of Sciences study that's going to be done. We wrote the report language. It's going to follow our strategic plan. And I'm hopeful, it'll take 18 months to get it done. I'm hopeful that when it's done, it will be able to be something that can be used by everyone. And it's a good way, if you're starting off, to go to your policymakers and say, we know there's not a lot of needs, we want to document it. And by documenting it, then you have a federally approved government resource that you can then turn around and say, well, this is what we know needs to be done. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kathleen. I think it's important what you drew forward about making sure that you've got those personal connections, but also reinforcing it with numbers, and so it brings the two together of what does it really mean, and then how can it be actioned and what can happen. So, questions?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. One aspect, and I'm not directly involved in our clinical development program, I work in industry, but I've heard multiple times that contracting for clinical studies with the VA and DOD was described to me as a nightmare. I mean, it keeps people from even attempting, and I wonder if there's any way to address that. I know this sounds in some ways almost trivial, but bureaucratic obstacles can actually often be an enormous impediment.
Absolutely, and Koldup would probably know more about that because I'm sure they're spending a lot of time talking how to streamline the process. And I think that the 3 awards that I was talking about are one way the Department of Defense has looked at how can we help people to get through the clinical process. I don't know, Koldup, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Koldup is way over there.
Yeah, I'm part of the programmatic panel, as Kathleen mentioned. The Department of Defense is aware that it's actually on both sides. The application is pretty intensive. It could be up to 75 pages, depending on which application you're coming into. And then on the other side, the contracting, as you mentioned, can also take time. you know, it's, they are aware of it. You know, it's the government. They have certain protocols and the way these applications have to come in. So, you know, we at the association have a little bit more flexibility on how full applications come in. They are set. Their mandate is set by the governmental standards, so they have to follow that. On the contracting side, I think that's an issue all around. I mean, even at the association, we have had projects that are year-long projects, but it takes 6 months to contract. So, you know, and that's the problem is, you know, once the contract goes to the legal office and, you know, all the redlining happens back and forth, things do get stuck. So I think it's a systemic problem. I don't think it's just a Department of Defense issue. I think contracting, how can we accelerate contracting is going to be important.
Thanks, Kuldeep.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
This question is from Kevin Robinson again, and he says, as a 41-year active duty veteran, I appreciate your efforts, so thank you. My question is why the ALS Association's strategic communication plan seems to be missing components like television commercials, telethons, fundraising, periods on radio and television, et cetera.
Who would like to answer that question? Okay. I think Dean back there. I think there's a lot going on that we don't know about, so I'm going to have Dean talk about it.
So first, of course, in North America, in the United States especially, those are all very expensive options. And there's a lot of competition for space in those markets. One of the things we're embarking on in the next year is to actually try and target various regions where we want to do a couple of things around, for instance, it ties in with our diversity, equity, and inclusion plans where we can target areas where we know we don't get enough resonance and do that. We're also targeting markets where our share of voice might be a little more effective. And we'll do that in the coming year in a couple of test markets to see if branching out in those media streams becomes a little more available for us. So that's the primary reason. It's not ignorance or willful neglect. It's purposeful attempt at targeting our dollars where we think we can get the biggest bang for our buck in those areas.
And obviously, we would like them to target specific members of Congress in terms of states or districts, because as we heard earlier, when policymakers hear about this, they're more likely to take action.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, Dean. I think that blends in well with what Sally was saying about awareness needing to be on the rise in order to be able to take action as well. Thank you.
Thank you.